has asked a federal judge not to unseal a sworn affidavit used by the FBI to recover 11 sets of secret government documents from Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida last week. The affidavit is the basis of an application that convinced a judge to sign off on the FBI's search warrant. In a federal court filing, prosecutors said the affidavit's release would compromise the continuing investigation and could chill the future cooperation of witnesses. The warrant, which was unsealed Friday, revealed Trump is being investigated for 3 federal crimes: violating the Espionage Act, obstruction of justice, and criminal handling of government records. Fallout from the FBI raid is continuing to grow as Republican lawmakers denounce the FBI, with Florida Senator Rick Scott comparing the agency to the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. Fox News host Jesse Waters has called for the firing of FBI Director Christopher Wray, who was appointed by Donald Trump.
Well, Chris Wray has to be fired by the next Republican president. Got to be fired on day one. Don't even wait. Just fire him right off the jump.
A growing number of Republicans are calling for the FBI to be defunded. Far-right Republican Congressmember Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted on Monday, "Impeach Merrick Garland and defund the corrupt FBI, end political persecution, and hold those accountable that abuse their positions of power to persecute their political enemies while ruining our country. This shouldn't happen in America. Republicans must force it to stop," Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted. Others calling for the FBI to be defunded include Anthony Sabatini, a Republican congressional candidate in Florida.
I think every single candidate and elected official in the GOP right now needs to go on record pledging to defund these lawless agencies.
The Republican attacks on the FBI mark a radical shift for the party, which has long embraced the FBI. Last year, Democratic Congressmember Bobby Rush of Illinois introduced legislation to force the FBI to disclose more details of its secret COINTELPRO program in the 1960s to surveil and disrupt groups including the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement, as well as Martin Luther King Jr. and other individuals. The legislation had 24 co-sponsors, none of them Republican. To talk more about the FBI, we're joined by Alex Vitale, professor of sociology and coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College here in New York. He's the author of The End of Policing. His new piece for Truth Out is headlined, "There Are Good Reasons to Defund the FBI. They Have Nothing to Do with Trump." Well, Professor Vitale, let's start there. It might shock many to hear, and we just chose a few clips, but they are growing around the country. Defund the FBI from Republicans all over the United States. Can you talk about this?
Well, it is a kind of amusing ideological confusion on their part. They've rested so much of their platform on a kind of back the blue authoritarianism, and to now see that turned around on the FBI is, on the one hand, amusing, but on the other hand, I think it's instructive. It tells us a lot about actually what they think the role of law enforcement is. It's not the neutral professional enforcement of the law that they often claim. It's actually a political tool. The difference here is that they think that it's a political tool that should be used on their behalf. And they're really upset to see law enforcement being used against so-called, God-fearing, patriarchal white nationalists, as opposed to using those forces against immigrant communities, communities of color, sex workers, and of course the political left. And so it's a kind of a repeat of January 6th, where we saw back the blue flags being used to beat local police.
Do you see a coming together of progressives who have called for defunding the police and these calls of really the far right here?
No, not at all. This is not about trying to build an alliance across the ideological divide. When people talk about defunding the police, on the left, they mean something radically different. I think what the right intends here is not to reduce the power of the FBI, but merely to change the leadership so that it is more politically compliant with the far right agenda.
Can you talk about the history of Donald Trump himself using the FBI as a political tool?
Absolutely. I mean, it is certainly true that the FBI is a political tool. The question is, whose interest does it really serve? Under Trump and many past presidents, we've seen the FBI used as a tool to gin up fear on crime, to demonize political enemies through things like the war on drugs, even the war on terror, and most recently with the Trump administration, right as he went into election mode, he tried to capitalize on fear of crime by creating Operation Relentless Pursuit that targeted exclusively Democratic cities for intensive flooding of federal agents, more money for local police, more intensive federal prosecutions of basically street crime in a way that was designed to try to say, look, the problems of urban America are not disinvestment, deindustrialization, racial segregation of housing. No, the problems of urban America, of democratic cities, is too much crime, and the solution to that is more policing. And that was a political project, and residents in most of these cities that were targeted immediately organized against this initiative and said what they need is investments in housing, stable employment, high quality healthcare, not more federal policing.
So go through
how do you stop the crime?
Of the FBI,
how do you stop the killing? Trump was right in
and
many
then
ways.
Talk about what
you got to
you're
slow the
calling
crime
for
down
and
first in order
how
to get
that
things done.
differs from what, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene are calling for.
In 2 minutes, the history of the FBI. So it
You can
started
have
as the
three.